Space, 1969. One of the turning points of human history as we ascended into the stars and landed on the moon for the first time ever, going the furthest our species has ever gone before. Even today in 2022, no human has gone further than the moon, which shows just how big of an achievement it was when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin touched down on the lunar surface. It's no surprise that this groundbreaking moment in history has always sparked the imagination of science fiction writers. So when BBC America agreed to co-produce episodes of Doctor Who Series 6, showrunner Stephen Moffat decided that a story set around the 1969 moon landing would be the perfect choice. This led to the two-part opening adventure, The Impossible Astronaut and Day of the Moon, where the Doctor straight up dies before he and his companions have to battle a secret, ancient alien threat. Despite the polarising reputation of Series 6, is this ambitious launch an all-time epic and memorable Doctor Who adventure, or does it fail to make it into orbit and burn itself up? Well, get your special straw for extra fizz, because we've only got one destination.
Space. 1969.
When it comes to kickstarting a new series of Doctor Who, it's always important to hit the ground running and make a good first impression. Series 1 had it with a montage of Rose's life culminating in her dramatic rescue from the Autons. Series 5 had the Doctor's desperate efforts to cling onto the TARDIS, and Series 6 continues the trend with a fun and fast-paced opening showcasing the Doctor's wacky misadventures throughout time as he tries to get Amy and Rory's attention. Now, if you've followed this channel for a while, you'll know I'm an absolute sucker for these kinds of moments. Scenes alluding to off-screen adventures we never get to see because the Doctor's life isn't just constrained to TV stories. It lends a real sense of scale and depth to the universe. I also appreciate the development in Amy and Rory's relationship, now owning their own home after their marriage in the Series 5 finale. Much like the Doctor, their life doesn't end when the credits roll, and moments like these showcase that effectively. The pair and River are then mysteriously summoned to America, so if they had any sense, they probably should have just binned the invitations because America. Yes, a big flex about this two-parter is the on-location filming in the USA, the first time the show had properly filmed in that country. Daleks Take Manhattan had some limited B-roll filming by a skeleton crew. The Impossible Astronaut was the first time the entire production team and cast travelled to the country, and the story really wants you to know that. It packs in as many stereotypes and bits of iconography as possible. Cowboy hats, a yellow school bus, an American diner, NASA, the literal president, and so much more. It basically contains every possible indicator that this story is set in America. Wait, did I mention America yet? Jokes aside, I do appreciate what it represents in terms of scale and budget though. It makes everything feel so big budget and high quality. The show had grown so popular and influential across the world that this represents the next evolution for the franchise, constantly improving and scaling up rather than settling for less. The reason the Doctor has summoned his companions to the desolate wastes of Freedom Land is for a picnic, which quickly becomes somber the moment Canton Everett Delaware III appears. I adore the change in tone, the music transforming the entire feel to mysterious and somewhat melancholic. Indeed, Neil Armstrong himself appears to straight up kill the Doctor, even preventing him from being able to regenerate. Now, it's not quite the same level of shock as the Stolen Earth cliffhanger, but it's still absolutely massive, murdering the main character in cold blood completely out of nowhere. I won't sit here and pretend I like how this storyline actually ends, but at this stage it's perfectly handled. From the music and directing to the acting and writing, every inch of this does a wonderful job convincing you of the finality of the Doctor's death. River explains the permanence of death during regeneration, and they even burn the body for good measure. It's such a tragic plot development, one of the best moments of pure character drama in modern Doctor Who, and possibly one of my favourite scenes in the Smith era. It screams high budget, a cinematic moment reaping the rewards of the previous 5 series. This is how you kickstart a story arc in a powerful and impactful way. The mystery and emotion instantly hooks you and pulls you in, especially because the Doctor is around 200 years older than the one we have for the rest of Series 6, lending real credibility to the idea of his death being permanent. Indeed, after the tragedy of the Doctor's death, the protagonists return to the diner where they find the Doctor, who was also invited. The confusion of this scene is brilliant, completing the absolute mindfuck of the whole thing. His high energy and excitement contrasts the grief and seriousness of the other protagonists, because they can't tell him about anything they've just seen and experienced. It creates a lot of great tension, especially when the Doctor drops his facade and confronts them on their secrecy. It's always important to remember this incarnation wasn't especially dark during Series 5, so this was one of the first times he started to adopt these more serious and multi-layered character traits, and they benefit the 11th Doctor a lot. The scene is somewhat hampered by this moment though.
Fish fingers and custard.
It had been so dramatic and serious up until this point, but then Amy chooses one of the goofiest things to make the Doctor trust her. I get that it's symbolic of her lifelong attachment and connection to the Doctor, but the line completely derails the tense atmosphere within the scene, because yeah, it's fish fingers and custard, it was a joke. However, I do absolutely love the fact that the protagonists know the Doctor is heading towards his death, creating a strong foreboding feeling. It reminds me of how the Doctor himself is always aware of River's death in the library. Whenever he sees her, he remembers that first meeting, constantly being confronted with the inevitability of her death as it gets closer every single time they cross paths. Flipping things like this is a nice parallel, especially because this story focuses on that aspect of their relationship, how they're experiencing their relationship in different directions. River is terrified of the day she meets the Doctor and he doesn't know who she is. She can't avoid that, and it constantly looms like a spectre. It's something you don't really think about when it comes to their relationship, but the concept has always been there. The scene of River acknowledging this fear adds a whole new, heartbreaking dimension to the events of Silence in the Library and Forest of the Dead. It essentially opens your eyes to what she was thinking and feeling throughout that story, adding a lot of context. This complicated and crushing relationship is handled well during this two-parter, especially during the epilogue, which once again twists the dagger planted firmly within your heart.
It's the first time for everything.
And a last time.
Unknowingly for the characters, the audience, and even most of the cast during filming, this story is one of the earliest points of River's life. Indeed, Amy thinks she's pregnant, although the TARDIS can't decide if she is or not, which is another good mystery, just like her coming across the scariest thing in the universe, a transphobe who appears throughout the early episodes to seed the whole pregnancy storyline. Alongside all of this, the protagonist is searching for a little girl who is making mysterious phone calls about an astronaut to President Nixon himself. It's interesting how this girl slowly becomes more important throughout the story. Initially, she's a plot device, moving the characters from the White House to the next part of the narrative. But as the story goes on, she becomes more and more relevant, slowly ramping up her significance within the wider series arc. There's a brilliant touch when Amy reveals her pregnancy, with the child appearing mere moments later. As we eventually find out, this child is her daughter Melody, so it's such a small yet brilliant touch foreshadowing the huge revelation in a subtle way. Although I have to admit it's hilarious that a real Doctor Who cliffhanger is one of our main characters seemingly murdering a child by shooting her in the face. Later on, Amy gets taken by the silence and all that remains is her nano recording device. This is a good way for Rory to receive a bit more of a focus, similar to Amy's disappearance in the Hungry Earth. To put it simply, Rory was pretty much only comic relief in Series 5. He was the bumbling and goofy idiot who mainly existed just to die. However, he was always the straight man who served as an outside perspective of the Doctor and Amy's relationship, so he was a relatable and lovable character despite the writing constantly putting him down. His character arc in that series culminated as he became an Auton and protected Amy inside the Pandorica for over 2,000 years, becoming a complete hero. Series 6 continues this by expanding his role within the show, giving him the same kind of respect and standing as Amy herself because he's a proper companion too. He gets more to do in this episode, like trying to explain the TARDIS to Canton, although he's still comic relief more often than not.
America salutes you.
The scripts simply respect Rory a lot more, giving him development and a serious storyline as he's forced to listen to Amy's one-sided cries for help and rescue. He has to sit there and constantly wonder what he can even do to save her, because he still feels inferior to the Doctor. Yes, Day of the Moon pretty much retreads the Series 5 storyline of Amy's questionable commitment to Rory, which I don't like at all. That series had already questioned whether she loved Rory or the Doctor, but it had been resolved by the end, which makes it so weird that they dredge it back up here just for it to end in the exact same place again. It's almost spiteful, torturing and beating down Rory for the fun of it, especially because it turns out he still remembers significant parts of his life as an Auton. He suffered through 2,000 years of war, plague and horror just to protect Amy, and he can never forget those memories. It further establishes how heroic he is, and justifies him being a permanent companion, but it just feels so weird to bring up the same old character dynamics again. Modern Doctor Who has built up somewhat of a reputation for impeccable casting when it comes to historical figures, and Stuart Milligan as the infamous President Richard Nixon is yet another example of this. Milligan is incredible, not only looking like Nixon, but also adopting all the mannerisms that have been parodied over the years. However, it's done in a way that feels genuine. He isn't a head in a jar trying to take over the world. He feels like a real person, with his own ideologies, for better or for worse. It helps that he's not the express focus of the story, like the celebrity historicals, and I actually think that helps the portrayal because it can stay simple.
Oh, Dickie. Tricky Dickie. They're never going to forget you.
Nixon's back!
There's a fun scene as the Doctor crashes a meeting between Nixon and Canton, the whole thing descending into chaos and leading to one of my favourite lines in Doctor Who.
You think you can just shoot me?
They're Americans!
Don't shoot, definitely no shooting.
Don't shoot us either.
How people can genuinely hate this man, I have no idea. It's always great to see the Doctor taking control and working the room. This kind of authority is one of the defining traits of the character, how they can walk into literally any situation or place in the universe and 5 minutes later they're the most trusted and powerful person in the entire room. It's honestly impressive how quickly and effortlessly he turns the situation to his favour and runs the show, overruling even the President of the USA. Have you ever walked into a room and completely forgotten why? Ever wondered why you can hear floorboards creaking for no reason? How about all those spooky stories of doors opening by themselves and objects moving around? In his eternal quest to scare children, Stephen Moffat decided to offer a very Doctor Who explanation for these everyday mysteries, which led to the creation of the Silence. Monsters he wanted to become as popular as the Weeping Angels. Whilst they definitely haven't become as ubiquitous as their stony counterparts, the Silence are very creepy and, rather ironically, they're unforgettable. Right from the beginning we're shown their abilities because Amy spots one on the hill and forgets it. A pretty creepy way to introduce the monsters. One particularly perverted Silent even sneaks into the women's bathroom. Absolutely disgusting. How could you? Creep. Jokes aside, the confrontation is expertly handled. Firstly, we get a proper look at the downright sinister design. They were inspired by Edvard Munch's The Scream, and their soaking wet suits create a very creepy Men in Black vibe. The scene also gives a clear explanation of the memory gimmick, showing you how you forget them the moment you look away, before we also see how they kill. There is no exposition here, no boring info dumps. It just gives you all you need to know when introducing a brand new significant monster. The Silence speak to our fear of the unknown since they've always been on the planet and we've never known about it. Moffat has always been obsessed with the idea of things hiding in the corner of your eye, and the Silence are one of the best uses of the concept. They can basically be used to explain any mystery in your life, so they're a good bit of everyday horror. They can control your actions and influence your decisions, essentially puppeting the human race from the shadows by planting ideas in people's heads. It's such a brilliant idea for a monster with endless potential, and the memory erasing gimmick creates some truly stellar moments. The tally marks are an iconic visual, and I absolutely adore the scene in the orphanage where Amy sees them suddenly appear on her skin, marking dozens of encounters within seemingly seconds. It's the same with the nano recorders, which flash red to mark an encounter with Asylum. Just from a single visual, the entire tone and feel of a scene can change, which is such a strong and positive consequence of the Silence premise. Because imagine the fear you would experience if you just look down and suddenly see all these tally marks come out of nowhere. I feel like the episode translates that well to the viewer, because the moment we see it flash up on a protagonist's skin, we know how much danger they're in. It's also a great visual reminder of the core concept of the Silence. Every time you see the tally marks, you remember how they operate, so it's a really creative way to keep that in your audience's mind. Speaking of the orphanage, I love the direction of this segment. It's directed and filmed like a full-on horror movie. It's one of those chilling and sinister Doctor Who scenes that gives you the heebie-jeebies. The visual storytelling of the tally marks and nano recordings creates a terrifying atmosphere, but one of the scariest parts is how the owner's mind has been completely melted by the Silence after years of constant memory erasure. He's the one who has been leaving all the marks and warnings on the walls, desperately trying to get out of there with all these warnings for himself, but instead he spends every day cleaning it off because he doesn't remember anything. It's another example of how powerful and threatening the Silence are, how effortlessly they can use people like puppets in such an extreme and traumatic way. They've been doing this for centuries, guiding and manipulating humanity. Even this painting kind of looks a bit like a Silent if you flip it upside down. The dominance of these monsters cannot be understated. It's not another alien invasion, because they're already in control. Hell, they were even involved during Series 5, which a montage reveals, along with the revelation of the ship in the Lodger being of Silence origin. It starts to connect some dots which we didn't even know needed to be connected, which is good for the overall Smith era storyline. Since the Silence already occupy and control the planet, the protagonists are essentially leading a resistance to liberate Earth from its alien overlords. This is immediately established in Day of the Moon, which skips forward 3 months and changes the entire tone of the story. Canton hunting down his former allies and the Doctor imprisoned within Area 51 with a cursed beard that looks horrible. It sets up such a sinister and grim tone of betrayal, since the companions seemingly all die at the hands of one of their friends. It does obviously turn out to all be an elaborate and cunning ruse so that the main characters can operate in complete secrecy, but it further shows how much of a grip the Silents have on the planet. You can't trust anyone or any place because you don't know when or where a Silent may be lurking. They can influence your mind and sabotage your plans, so it puts our main characters on the back foot and they need to do whatever they can to turn the tide against the monsters they can't even remember seeing. I've always been enamoured with the idea of a long-form serialised story of the Doctor and or their companions fighting to liberate the Earth from alien occupation, and this two-parter gives us a tantalising glimpse of that really effectively. So you have the Silents, this seemingly undefeatable group of monsters who already control the planets and every civilization. You can't remember what they look like, so you can't organise a full-on resistance movement, or use the conventional tactics to try and beat them. So what do? Well, Day of the Moon provides the perfect solution. You use the Silents' gimmick against them. After Canton shoots one of them like the red-blooded American he is, the protagonists realise they can use this prisoner to unknowingly wipe out his own race. The Silents have been planting ideas into human minds for all of history, so what do? You plant your own ideas, obviously. Indeed, Canton tricks the Silent into commanding people to kill the monsters, and with a handy use of Amy's very 2011 camera phone, they broadcast the out-of-context clip in the middle of the moon landing. This is absolutely genius. After all, an estimated 650 million people across the world watched this transmission. That's roughly 21% of the entire planet in 1969, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's nearly a quarter of the entire human race at that point in history. It's one of the most watched television events in all of time, and the footage will always be historically relevant. So by putting this subliminal message into the transmission, it essentially means the Silents will always be targeted. Even though people will forget the message itself, they will always remember the order whenever they actually see a Silent, so it's such a clever way to create a revolution. Although it's a bit weird that the Doctor is so happy to advocate for genocide here, but then again I suppose it's mainly just a way to scare the monsters off the planet rather than actually wiping them all out over generations. Everything about the ending has a really high stakes and cinematic feel. This is a big two-parter in almost every way. It has a big scale, a huge new threat, and it introduces a number of storylines, so the climax needs to feel suitably dramatic and epic. It achieves this perfectly, feeling really triumphant as the revolution begins and the Silents are overthrown to the majestic tale. One of the only times I can appreciate I Am the Doctor. It's almost like the end of a movie, once again flexing the increase in budget and confidence within the show. So I really like it because it wraps everything up in a satisfying way. However, what isn't as satisfying is the final scene of the episode. Everything about the narrative has built up this mystery around the little girl and who she is, so when you get to the end you expect the Doctor to be determined to solve the mystery, since she was the Silents' target for unknown reasons. But no, instead he says,
Or we could just go off and have some adventures. Anyone in the mood for adventures? Because I am. You only live once.
I guess people just weren't ready for serialization yet. You have to stick to the formula even when it makes no sense. It's such a shame because the episode ends on an absolutely tantalising cliffhanger, the child regenerating, something literally only Time Lords can do. And remember, they're all gone, it's just the Doctor. Even the Master was taken back to Gallifrey, so having a mysterious character regenerate on camera is a brilliant way to set up a direct continuation in the following story. But instead of capitalising on this momentum by providing answers or having another plot-centric episode, we get a random pirate adventure that has almost nothing to do with the wider storyline. It's such a letdown, like having a Michelin star dining experience, but rather than ordering dessert, they take you outside and make you eat from the bins instead. It's not this story's fault, but my god it makes the ending suck with hindsight. It's hard to open a series of Doctor Who, especially one as experimental as Series 6. However, The Impossible Astronaut and Day of the Moon are two absolutely incredible episodes, showcasing the newfound budget and confidence of the show. The location filming is excellent, lending an important sense of authenticity to the American setting, expanding the show's horizons effectively. The narrative itself is high stakes and thrilling, perfectly paced with lots of excitement alongside truly haunting and chilling sequences, and the two-parter does a brilliant job introducing all the mysteries and storylines of Series 6. We've got a brand new tier list now and I'm coming in all guns blazing with an instant S rank. This is by far one of my favourite Matt Smith stories because it has everything you could ever want in a Doctor Who story. There's sharp wit, horrifying and creative monsters, the acting is great across the board, there's a strong supporting cast including a wonderfully realised historical figure, it's an adventure full of conspiracies, intrigue and character drama. It's almost like a movie with the scale of its story and the epic climax. I could happily rewatch it any key point because it's nearly flawless. So regardless of the way a lot of the plot points they introduced ended up, The Impossible Astronaut and Day of the Moon are two magnificent episodes of Doctor Who kicking things off in style. It's just a shame about some of the stuff that came afterwards. And I'd like to give an extra special thank you to all my Diamond level patrons, Daniel Shillito, Fallon Cortez and Nissa Phillips, and my Platinum level patron Mark Hippold Guy Taylor, and all my Gold level patrons, Alex Marston, Basil Disco PhD, Calvin, Francois AK Line Vortex, Herna Verzog, Luke_SY, and Steph Never Miller. Thank you so much for your support.